All right, so here we are. We are back at our faculty series. If anybody was at the colloquium next or last week, that was amazing. The whole week was amazing. We are going to be having, I'm going to be sending out a summary this week on everything that we had going on in the colloquium, and then our a link to our site. So you'll be able to get that information if you're interested in watching any of those recordings from last week at our colloquium. But we are at our third series in our faculty series sessions with Allie Hopper this week, talking about the current trends in human trafficking, which she did speak at our colloquium along with Jared Sadolski, and it was amazing. It was absolutely phenomenal. We probably, our conversation after they spoke could have gone on for hours after. A lot of interest, a lot of questions. Today, March 11th, is part one of Allie's faculty series. There are 4 parts to her series. So today she's going to be talking about related to more like a legislation and how to hold traffickers accountable. That's what today will be revolved around. And then on March 25th, she's back. So in 2 weeks, she's back talking about protecting children against sextortion. If you've never heard that word, you're going to learn all about what that is. And then April 8th, which is 2 weeks after April 25th, it's every 2 weeks on a Tuesday. She's going to be talking in her part 3 about how grooming occurs and how to protect against that. And then finally, in part 4, she's going to be talking about the different forms of human trafficking. A lot of people, I think it's just one thing, and I bet you there's a bunch of different forms that she's going to explain that to us. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Allie and she can get started. So welcome, Allie. We're so happy to have you here today. You are on mute still.
Oh, the joys of technology. Thank
There
you
you
so much
go.
for having me. So I am going to bring up my screen and then we can get going on the PowerPoint. Okay. So to reiterate what you were saying, this session will be on human trafficking legislation, bridging the gaps to ensure accountability. My name is Allie Hopper, and I am the president and co-founder of Guard Against Trafficking. It was founded as well with Dr. Jared Sadolski, who you guys are familiar with. Today is the 11th, and here we go. A bit about me. I am a consultant and public speaker on global human trafficking. Dr. Sadolski and I have traveled nationally and internationally, Central, South America, and we research, educate, and consult with individuals on human trafficking, counter trafficking, and how to make communities safer and shape conversations about how to actually implement certain policies successfully. Jumping to that, I am a policy advocate for child protection, counter trafficking, veterans, and mental health. The presentation overview, the first thing we'll touch on is a brief overview of human trafficking just to get an understanding. We'll take a brief look at the current legislation landscape. We'll identify legislative gaps and how to solution to bridge those gaps, and then action steps and advocacy. So to get an understanding about what we'll be discussing is we need to take the first step and understand really what the main and core components are of human trafficking. There are 3 main components that are discussed when you're discussing human trafficking. First being sex trafficking, which is one of the more familiar forms of trafficking that people are aware of. And in all 3 instances, you'll note that it is a crime that quite honestly and frequently uses force, fraud, or coercion to induce. And so with the sex trafficking component, it is to induce another individual to sell sex. Common types of this include escort services, pornography, illicit massage, stuff like that. The next component is labor trafficking, which again uses force, fraud, and coercion to induce another individual to work or provide a service. Common types for this would include agriculture, domestic work, restaurants, cleaning services, and those types of jobs. The final one that is not as discussed is organ trafficking, and that is using force, fraud, or coercion to exploit individuals for the illegal removal, sale, and transplantation of organs. Those victims are often deceived, threatened, or forcibly subjected to organ removal, with traffickers targeting vulnerable populations for black market organ sales. I found this chart and it was from Polaris Project. And the data runs, so the data is actually a little old. It's from '07 to 16. But what I found really important was that the number of cases, and it really shows 25 distinct businesses and the types of trafficking that occurs within those businesses. I thought it was a very good visual to show, although the data ranges until the 6th of 2016. And we know human trafficking has skyrocketed since that point in time. But it really shows the breakdown of distinct businesses in which trafficking occurs. You can see escort services, that's primarily sex trafficking. You can see illicit massage, but that also entails sex and labor trafficking, outdoor solicitation, residential sex trafficking, and then you see domestic work. That's cases of labor trafficking. That could be someone being forced into being a house cleaner to pay off a debt. That could be any type of domestic work. So as it breaks it down, I think it's a very strong visual to show some of the distinct businesses in which trafficking may operate. The anatomy of a trafficking network. Now, again, this is very high level, but it is key to understanding some of these components when you are looking at legislation, you're looking at your criminal codes in your state, and you're trying to protect yourself and your community from trafficking. Bringing up my notes on this. So the roles in which trafficking occurs, there are recruiters, there are transporters, there are enforcers, there are buyers, and there's facilitators. The recruiters they drive that initial stage. Victims are lured through false promises like jobs, education, a better life. And this can happen through online ads, personal connections, and coercion. The second step is transportation, and they handle the logistics of the movement. Victims are moved from their origin to a destination, whether it's locally or across the border. And the methods used are vehicles, forged documents, hidden compartments, and as we've seen, airfare with our open border situation, people were actually flying into the interior using our local commercial airlines. The third step is exploitation. The enforcers handle compliance and retention. Victims are forced into labor, sex, or other forms of exploitation. Again, we covered some of those examples: forced prostitution, sweatshops, domestic servitude. The fourth step is control, and the traffickers maintain power over their victims, whether it's by violence, it's debt bondage, confiscation of IDs and documents, or threats of their family back home or concern over personal safety. The end shows that the victims may remain trapped indefinitely, or in rare cases, escape and rescue may occur. Some of the other roles that are highlighted above are the buyers and the facilitators. The buyers exploit victims for profit, whether they knowingly or unknowingly are participating in a trafficking situation. So if you are at a nail salon and you are receiving, a manicure, you're not sure that that individual is being labor trafficked, but nonetheless, it is still, whether knowingly or unknowingly, a buyer of the product that they're selling. And facilitators are the ones that enable the process through bribes, documents, and connections. So this anatomy of a trafficking network, it's very high level, but again, it's very important to understand when you're looking at legislation, you're looking at items in your criminal codes in your respective states or even at a federal level, that you understand that there are various processes in which legislation can step in and actually kind of break this cycle. It can break this cycle at any point in time of this cycle. The current human trafficking legislation, there's three main categories. The first one being federal. I highlighted a few different federal legislative pieces, and I won't go through all of them. The first one, though, is more well known. It establishes human trafficking as a federal crime and provides victim protections and enhances law enforcement efforts. The FOSTA and SESTA, that's important as well. It holds online platforms accountable for knowingly facilitating sex trafficking. So that's very important, especially as we dive into a larger digital footprint and have a larger digital realm. There are also state level variations of these and international treaties that help in the interim with this. So state level variations may be state level trafficking statutes that have been implemented. There are a lot of bills going through the legislature right now that address human trafficking, both in the sex industry or the labor industry, whether you're hiring according to state law and going through the proper protocols to make sure that you are hiring accordingly and making sure that you have the proper documentation, making sure that the individuals that you're hiring don't appear to be under duress, items like that. Where legislation has its strengths is that it often provides victim protection, it provides funding for services, there are federal task forces, and it can at times provide increased penalties. But where there are weaknesses is that there are inconsistent state laws. And as we know, a lot of these crimes cross state lines, they cross state boundaries. And in the digital realm, again, it makes it very complicated for state by state laws to influence and have a say in what goes on in cross state interactions. I jumped to the second point, loopholes in online facilitation. There are also challenges with responsibility as far as the online platform host. How much are they held responsible? How quickly are they to respond to a report of a improper post or an improper video? So making sure that the legislation promptly acts and reacts to the information that it's being provided accordingly. Lack of sufficient data sharing. There is a silo of data that is shared or not shared between states and between one state and another state. And sometimes that can harm this movement because you have traffickers, you have bad actors that know and exploit those silos of information. They know one state may not talk to another. And so in a example of a substitute teacher, you could have a predator that's a substitute teacher, and then they can be let go from their position, and the databases don't share across even district wide. They can jump to another district and continue teaching. So depending on the reasons on why they're let go, depending on the data that is being shared or not shared interagency between states, that can hinder an ability to have legislation be effective. Insufficient prosecution of buyers. There have been there needs to be a serious review of how we go about prosecuting buyers. A lot of them are able to plea down or plea out A lot of them are repeat offenders. And again, with that lack of data sharing, and state by state, it's harder to identify and kind of pin down these buyers. And then often, lastly, the victims themselves are criminalized. So they will be caught with drugs, or they will be charged with prostitution. And oftentimes it's not further explored whether it is a forced prostitution situation or it's a drug situation where they were held in captivity and actually ended up hooked on drugs as a result of their handler. So the impact of legislative gaps, the traffickers exploit these inconsistencies. I will be very frank, in Dr. Sadulski and I's research, the traffickers are very much aware. They study our laws, and that comes as a shock to many people, but they study our laws both statewide and federally, and they exploit the inconsistencies in the laws. They know how to circumvent the law. They they do so accordingly. The victims often end up re-traumatized, especially when a story has to be repeated multiple times within a police department. And then if they decide to move forward with prosecution, that deposition process can be very daunting for any victim, never mind a victim that may be afraid of their handler, or under the circumstances that they were held in, if they still have family members that are at risk or in danger. And then if there is an immigration status that they are concerned about as well, that adds an additional layer of victims being fearful and fearing of re-traumatization. There are also, unfortunately, very low conviction rates for a lot of these individuals. Or again, they plead down to lesser offenses. So an example here in Florida, if you are a first-time offender for purchase of prostitution, you end up with a misdemeanor, and if you go through the diversion program, you can end up with your file expunged, and so it clears your file. And a lot of these data, sorry, there's a gnat in my face. A lot of these data sharing processes across agencies don't happen. And so there have been prosecutors that have told me there are repeat offenders that use these lower conviction rates, these plea deals, and they exploit them. And then there's cross-jurisdictional failures, which again, I was highlighting with the lack of data sharing and the lack of being able to track some of these bad activities across not just districts and counties, but states. So how do we bridge that gap? Some of the ways to help is model legislation. When you have consistent legislation, state by state or county by county, if you have an ordinance, that helps develop a consistency, not only for law enforcement, but then there's a consistent expectation across state lines that these crimes will be prosecuted in the same way. So if you have a state that prosecutes purchase of prostitution at a misdemeanor, and then you have a state that prosecutes prostitution at a felony 3, you're going to get very different outcomes. Again, we do respect state by state rights, but there is a need for awareness on consistency and cohesiveness in fighting certain crimes that know no bounds, no socioeconomic, no racial or ethnic boundaries. So it is something that is a nonpartisan issue that should gain bipartisan support, and model legislation is one of the ways to do that. Again, with uniform sentencing, if sentencing is a little bit more uniform, that helps as well. Interagency cooperation, being able to share data. If you have a perpetrator or a bad actor in your state, and if you have suspicion that they might be from a prior state, or they have a prior address showing a prior state, that coordination and that interagency cooperation can be key in identifying how to actually prosecute and proceed with this individual, knowing that there might be prior history there. There's also a way to demand a reduction by targeting the supply. If you're targeting the supply, then you're targeting the demand. And then lastly, there is a need and a major gap in victim support. A lot of these victims end up with prostitution charges, drug charges. And when you're in a high stress situation, and this is not excusing any behavior, but when you're in a high stress situation where your handler may have got you hooked on drugs, or you're taking drugs or using alcohol to cope with some of the most horrific situations that you could possibly be put through, there needs to be a understanding about how to support someone, not just physically, but also mentally, mental health wise, and provide trauma services, provide job training, education, and things to provide victims support that they need. There is a major power in collaboration. When law enforcement and lawmakers, survivors, nonprofits and NGOs and communities come together, there is a immense amount of power that comes from that collaboration. When they are siloed, there's disconnect in communication, there's disconnect in conversation about what is needed between each of these groups. But when there's collaboration and communication, that is when you really see legislation change and transform the landscape in which we operate. And I'll give you a quick case study. So, all of what I'm talking about with the power of collaboration, with bridging the gaps, I am familiar with that because I actually introduced a anti-grooming bill here in the state of Florida. And since then, well, I won't jump ahead, but that anti-grooming bill did incorporate all of these powers of collaboration. It did incorporate collaborating with law enforcement, lawmakers, survivors, nonprofits, and community members. So when I mentioned this, when I mentioned the power and the strength of this, I'm talking from a position of experience. With this anti-grooming bill, to explain a little bit so that there's an understanding, about a year and a half ago, there was a woman that I highly respect, and she came to me with an amendment, language for an amendment, to amend a grooming bill that was already present in the state of Illinois. When I took it back to look at it for possible introduction and implementation here in Florida, I realized that we didn't have a statute in our criminal code on grooming. And when I discuss grooming, that is the sexual manipulation of a child by an adult. That is harmful communication and conduct of an adult with a child, with a minor. And so when I noticed that we didn't have that bill, I also noticed that we had a initial review of the Florida statutes, and there was not one place or statute that I could find all of the relevant information or elements of the crime of committing unlawful grooming. So when I looked at the statutes, there were statutes in place that prevented against luring and enticing. There were not any statutes in place that prevented harmful communication and explicit communication and conduct of an adult with a minor. So if you're sexting a minor, if you're on an app and you're inappropriately talking to a minor, there were no laws in place that law enforcement could intervene before a luring and enticing component occurred, or before child pornography or an obscenity clause was impeded upon. So what we needed to do was develop legislation to bridge the gap and protect children before sexual assault actually occurred. And so what it did was it aligned unlawful grooming to the criminal acts with the criminal intent leading to a felony charge. And it focused on the criminal inflicting undue influence on a minor for sexual gratification of the criminal. What we did with that was we met with, let me bring up my notes on that quick. We met with, what I mentioned, going back to collaboration, law enforcement. We met with sex crimes. We met with the Department of Children and Family Services. We met with law enforcement. We made sure that we met with law enforcement, knowing their concerns, knowing their struggles before we started even drafting the language for submission. We met with lawmakers so that they understood not just the law we were trying to introduce, but the crime itself. There's a gap in misunderstanding about grooming and what it is and what it does. And so when we were able to actually sit down and explain it, there was a complete embrace over the bill in a bipartisan way, because it's a nonpartisan issue. We met with survivors that were victims of sexual grooming that actually also sometimes ended in the result of being either sexually assaulted or human trafficked as well. So they had a voice in the language. We met with numerous NGOs and nonprofits where they were completely supportive of the bill. And once it started going through the legislative process, they were able to voice and show support in their way and reach out to their email list, their community members to voice support for the bill as well. And then lastly, we reached out to community members for support. So it goes to show the power of that collaboration. Long story short, when you introduce legislation and you have never introduced legislation before, and you get legislation introduced, passed through 3 committees on the House, 3 committees on the Senate, and signed by the governor in under 8 months with a $0 budget, it means that you're taking a successful and efficient approach. And that is how we approached the anti-grooming bill. And for reference, it is HB 1545. Now, I will tell you there were some challenges. There's always challenges in introducing legislation, but it now serves as a model for other states across the country. It, in the same time and at the same parallel that we were running Florida's legislation, I was also working with an Iowa state rep and got it passed in Iowa. There's a bill passed in Arizona, in Georgia now, and it is in progress in multiple other states. So it goes to show that a concept of collaboration and wraparound communication really does move the needle forward, not just in child protection, not just in human trafficking, but in any kind of legislative priority that you would have to move the needle forward and improve our communities. This advocacy really propelled it into further action. Since then, Dr. Sadolsky and I have been involved in local, state, and federal engagement and action. The picture on the top left is me testifying a congressional committee on Homeland Security. Prior to that, Dr. Sadolsky also testified in a similar congressional committee on Homeland Security, and as well as a Senate committee. And then since then, we have been consulting with key stakeholders in all levels of government. So it really is a position in a way to start to impact legislation when you're taking it at all levels of government and you're taking a full-rounded approach. The key takeaways from this is that legislation must adapt. It needs to adapt because legislation isn't crimes aren't stagnant. Human traffickers know that there are ways to get around current statutes, so legislation needs to adapt. It needs to adapt based on how your state functions. It needs to adapt based on what's in your criminal code. So in some states, the grooming bill is a different felony charge than in other states, but it needs to fit in with your criminal code, and you need to understand that legislation must be able to adapt and fit into what you
Yes.
currently have in place. These gaps allow impunity. A unified approach is needed, and everyone has a role. What can you do? You can support legislation. You can contact your representatives. You can join organizations. You can work to educate your community, or you can fund survivor initiatives, or you can do all of the above. But there's always a way to get involved. Final thoughts as you continue to learn about these issues and encourage others to educate themselves and to protect themselves and their children and their communities. Just make sure that you stay engaged with your communities, your lawmakers, your law enforcement agencies. And lastly, in this space, if you ever see something that is concerning as it relates to human trafficking, please say something. There are hotlines. I have included them in the slides. And make sure that you say something, because if we see something and we do nothing, then, we aren't contributing to a safer society. Thank you. And that is the end of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Allie. That was absolutely wonderful and so informative. And I just would like to open it up to anybody who would like to have questions to Dr. or to Allie Hopper, and also comments, if you just have comments. Does anybody have anything that they would like to say or questions? If you're talking, I think you're on mute, so make sure you come off mute.
I always have comments, so I'm happy to share because I find these to be incredibly thought-provoking and reflective on, depending on the topic, on things that impact us daily. It really is. You might not see it in your immediate world, but it's out there occurring, often unseen, and that actually makes it a little more dangerous or toxic, let's say, when it's not seen. The stuff that you see you can deal with. The stuff you can't see, you might not even know what's going on, and then it just sits there and grows. But Allie, great job. Great turnout today. So apparently you helped promote this, and that's very important to share these kinds of events on your social media and invite other colleagues or family and friends. We also advertise internally, so I saw a couple of our faculty on as well. So I'm happy about that. But get the word out. That's part of getting as many people here as possible. Once we take this recording and put it on a website, you can also take that and put it on your social media to help share your presentation today. Something that sort of stood out to me was the sophistication of these trafficking networks. I mean, they're as sophisticated and elaborate and thoughtful as a Fortune 500 company. I mean, you were showing there how they have these different columns of how they tackle this and really approach it in a methodical way. And it just fascinates me. It's not just somebody sitting in some, third world country, let's say, trying to prey upon their own citizens and, take advantage of them. This is very high level of cooperation, sometimes with government entities may be involved in certain countries. So that was the part that I thought was really, shocking, or a little bit of just wow effect, that it was that sophisticated. I also heard one time, and of course I don't remember the exact statistic, and I don't even know how accurate it is when you hear things. I didn't go investigate the accuracy of this, but I heard it was something like 70%, it may have been in the mid 60s, 70% of all illegals arrive on an airplane with a tourist visa, and then they just stay here. They never go back. They're not really crossing the border. There's a lot of people crossing the border, but that's not where the majority of them are, how they're getting in. They're coming in through an airplane, and they're doing it sort of legally on a tourist visa, and then they, stay illegally beyond that. I actually heard originally when Donald Trump was running for his first presidency, he said, talking about building the wall. And a lot of folks in Mexico were laughing, saying, we just fly over it in an airplane now anyway. So building a wall is not going to stop us. We'll just look out at it from the airplane, as we arrive on a tourist visa and then just stay. Is that accurate? Is how much of that is true?
There are exploitations of visas. I think that that's going to be thoroughly reviewed with this administration, not just for those that exploit it, but also to facilitate a stronger visa program to actually allow more easy pathways to citizenship for those that really have shown that they've done the work, that they are, they've been fully vetted. But under a tourist visa, if I'm not correct, please correct me, but I think that there's a certain level of vetting than when they're crossing over the border. There wasn't a high level of vetting that was able to be done, especially when you're laundering your identity at the border. Then you're not able to know who's crossing in. And we do know for a fact that there were numerous bad actors, foreign terrorists that crossed in over the border. And I highly doubt, although I could be incorrect, that they'd be able to obtain a tourist visa and fly into the interior. So there is exploitation within the tourist visa system. But as far as height crossings that allow or permit a higher level of or present an issue of higher level of national security, that is where I think the focus is immediately on right now, and then being able to further review the immigration process, the visa status, and how can that be refined to work a little bit more efficiently.
Yeah, it's kind of a tap dance along a wire, because you don't want to assume everybody's trying to get in illegally. And you also don't want to assume everybody is trying not to get in illegally. You have to somehow be able to screen. And many of us probably have traveled abroad, and typically, depending on the country, you might have to have a visa before you arrive. We have some reciprocity with certain countries where we don't need permission. We can just show up, and it's the same with them. Like Japan, you just get on a plane and fly there, and they can get on a plane and fly here, and they don't have to have a visa in advance. But for certain countries where you have to have a visa, there is an application. They do ask you things. What do you do? What is your job and things like this, so they can make sure that you have a reason to return to your country, that you have stakes sort of invested in your country, so that you don't have a reason to go there and never go back. But maybe that's part of what we do, and people still get in anyway through that, manipulating that information. One other question I have, and maybe you'll talk about this later as well, and that is, how is technology assisted with the management of this network that you were showing? How has technology really increased the efficiency and impact of that illegal network, like recruitment, for example? People reaching out to other people through social media, maybe, and encouraging them to participate in this underground network.
Yeah, that's definitely a great question. That will be one subject that I further explore on in the next session when we discuss sextortion. But to answer your question, the bad actors are able to absolutely use the internet not only for recruitment but also for and I hate to say it, but the sale of their commodity, whether they're trying to put someone out on the market for a domestic servitude for cleaning, or trying to get a buyer for sex services. It really has made the process easier, and they're able to mask their intentions depending on how they advertise the ad. There's also a component to technology which has impacted the way in which people pay for these services. We have seen higher level rings actually use cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin to be able to mask some of the purchases and be able to purchase services that way. So technology impacts absolutely our children, our communities as far as recruitment, but it also has been able to help traffickers facilitate a easier process, not only of transportation and marketing of what they're trying to sell, but then buyers being able to buy the products more efficiently. We do have individuals that are in the IT community that also are able to use IT and counter this narrative. They're able to actually use some of these technologies to be able to track down IPs, addresses of these individuals. So it does go both ways, but it has presented a challenge, especially with children in the mix.
Yeah, you can envision some kind of like online store, where hey, find a coyote and here's the price of this coyote, or hey, locate false documents, or think of ways to get transportation. And you're kind of selling these services through some kind of online store, like the Amazon of human trafficking, so to speak. My
Yep.
last comment is just, keep advocating, keep being involved, keep trying to create change, because that is how this is impacted. The more that the decision makers in Washington, let's say, are aware of these events, and the more they can pass legislation, the better. But also advocating in our communities, because sometimes, again, we don't even know that it's occurring, and we see things, and again, if you see it, report it, say something, see something, say something. So thank you, Allie.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do want to highlight there is a role for every single individual of every single background. There aren't individuals, just kicking in doors. We educate nurses to be able to identify signs. We educate educators like yourselves to be able to not only identify signs but be able to kind of pass those lessons along and be able to protect communities and just on a more high level sense, be able to educate people on the governmental process that runs our entire country. You would be surprised at the number of individuals that Dr. Sadolsky and I have encountered that don't understand even the three branches of government and what their roles are. And so when you break it down and people start to understand the three branches of government, what their roles are, that the legislative introduces laws and the executive enforces laws and that the judicial interprets the law. Like, you need to understand these things in order to just not only be a good steward in your community, but to just be able to understand legislation, understand the laws that impact you as well. So it's really important that all of us kind of tap into our skill sets and our backgrounds as far as how what we do for our personal lives and how can those skill sets actually help safe in our communities.
Yeah, it looks like Jared has his hand
Yeah.
raised. Maybe he
Dr.
wants to comment.
Sadolsky's had his hand up for a while. Let him talk.
Yeah, no worries. So I wanted to kind of add on to what Ali was talking about, to Kevin's question on technology. Technology is really the cornerstone of what these trafficking networks are using. So when Ali and I were at the border in August, we were there as a guest of an organization that works on the border, collects intelligence at the border, and then hands it over to law enforcement. And they'd shared with us a cell phone that they had picked up on the border. And inside, they were able to actually hack into the cell phone. The password was 1234. And it turned out to be a trafficker from Wuhan, China, that whenever we got into the phone and looked at all the messages, there was Telegram chats. And the Telegram chats talked about how to purchase a child for sex, talked about how to hire a smuggler, how to traffic people through the border into the United States, into specific stash houses with addresses in the United States. It also talked about the US nuclear posture. So that's just one example of how the TCO network, the Transnational Criminal Organization Network, are using technology to engage in trafficking. But we're seeing case after case of children that are being trafficked in the United States. The information is being uploaded to the cloud, and that is how these criminals are communicating, what's going on, how much the child owes, where the child's located, the demographic information of the child. And so technology, it seems like the criminals and the TCO network, is two steps ahead of law enforcement in the use of technology. When we testified before the Congress and Senate and we brought up specific examples, it was the first that they had heard of that. And so, we're seeing technology being used exponentially by the traffickers.
Cliff Johns has his hand up as well. Cliff, are you ready to speak? You're up, Cliff, if you're ready. I can see your hand up. You have to come off mute. Okay. Hand went down, so maybe that was just.
Got it.
Oh, you
Found
got
it.
it. Great. Okay.
Sorry. Allie, now that the border is effectively closed by the new administration, what can you comment on what the cartels are doing to increase their business now that that venue of portal has been closed?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Unfortunately, the border being open exacerbated the issue, but it didn't create the issue. Human trafficking has been a problem for a very long time, and it has been present in the United States for a very long time. What the open border did was create a flood of it in a more open market. A lot of cartels that didn't previously deal in human trafficking, they simply dealt in drugs and arms when they saw an opportunity because there was an open border. They actually switched business models and then also incorporated human trafficking into their business models because it was made easier for them to make money very quickly and use policies that were previously in place, such as uh, having an unaccompanied child be in the care of HHS for 2 weeks and then sending them on to an unvetted sponsor. That was absolutely a policy that the cartels knew about and exploited because they would pass the child information and know that within 2 weeks the child would end up in the hands of a sponsor, which was most of the time hand selected by the cartel or gang member. So unfortunately, the U.S. operated as a transportation hub in that sense, to facilitate that process. So with the borders being closed now, we still have a flood of bad actors in the country. We are working to quickly deport a lot of these bad actors, these terrorists, these cartels, these gang members that not only were criminals in their home country, but have also committed horrific crimes in this country. But let's say that gets 100% resolved, which will take a long time and may never be fully resolved. We still have a problem with domestic trafficking within the United States. So to make sure that we have strong legislation in place and strong law enforcement that can enforce strong legislation and prosecutors that can prosecute on strong legislation. So if we are able to prevent that, then that will help move the needle forward again for a safer community. So I'll give you a quick example on the grooming bill. It became effective in October of 2024 here in Florida. We were speaking to a law enforcement group and had mentioned to them that I was the author of the bill and that we were key in getting that implemented and passed here in Florida. And we had a law enforcement officer stand up extremely excited and said that they were following that law or that bill all the way through until it became voted on and effective. And 3 days after it became effective, they were able to arrest a John that was a substitute teacher that was sexting a minor in his class. So this isn't even a situation of a border issue. This isn't even a situation of a cartel member, but but this is a bad actor. This is someone in the community that was looking to exploit a child. And this is a example of not only being able to impact legislation to protect your community, but an example of a domestic situation that was prevented by strong legislation.
Wonderful. Brandy, I see your hand up.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I have a question for Allie. As so I'm the communications director for an organization, and so I'm bringing information. I'm gonna ask her. I'm gonna share from people who are boots on the ground in this. So I want to preface by saying, in our sex trafficking cases within Texas, since the administration changed prior to where we are now, we did see an influx of migrant cases when it came to whether it was adults or children. Now 90% of our cases are migrant cases. So my question for Allie is, and by the way, we adore her and Dr. Jared Sadolsky and their work they do. We got to get their information out to everyone. So thank you for having them, number one, too. And thank you for coming on, Allie, and sharing all this information everyone needs. But my question is this: how much domestic? I want to make sure, and I do believe that you said those things for a reason. When you said domestic a moment ago, God knew what I was going to share. My question is for everyone, including myself, knowing what I've just shared about how much we're seeing migrants involved in the trafficking cases we see in Texas now. How much do you think involves domestic, and does that even matter to the extent of we want to make sure, right, that everyone knows this is domestic and migrant? So what can you share with us as far as how much domestic is involved? Because I'm feeling the need to make sure that everyone knows, of course you do, right? But that the border is definitely a huge problem. And yes, this is definitely going to bottleneck that at the border. But working the interior side, we have not seen any slowdown whatsoever. There's they're ramping up more. I know you've heard us share, Allie, one-on-one, that when we close one case, there's 30 waiting. And we mean that. So I just want to ask you for the opportunity of sharing how much domestic is involved and just what we truly can do here, right, locally, like you're sharing, to protect our communities. Of course, I know that answer, but I want to hear, according to what you have found, what y'all think that the most important thing is for us to know about that. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Absolutely. So one of the things that has been brought to our attention is that there have been a increase or a increased awareness on the exploitation and actually sexual assault of children and adults with disabilities. So there needs to be greater protections and awareness on those adults and minors that have disabilities because they aren't able to as easily communicate what happened or understand what happened to them. But there is a major under discussed group of victims that are children and adults with whether it's physical or mental disabilities, that there needs to be more protections around that. There also need to be more of an understanding as far as certain programs under Health and Human Services. It is a large department, large. And so it needs to be completely dissected and understood on how the CPS program can be better understood, how it can be better run, how social workers aren't inundated with cases that they can't possibly manage, caseloads. We know that there's a shortage of case workers. We know there's a shortage within CPS, but there is a lot of exploitation that occurs within the foster care system as well. So how can we revisit that with a new lens and be able to understand without placing blame on certain individuals, but just fix the problem. Fix the problem so that children aren't getting exploited and the foster care system isn't getting exploited for families that are just looking for a paycheck, but they have 15 children stuffed into one bedroom. So when you try and look at the situation and understand that there's individuals that are inundated, caseloads, workloads, on, reviewing requirements as far as entering in that job, salary requirements, and then understanding what are the requirements in which CPS operates in each state. There's state agencies as well, understanding how that works so that we can better protect children and better facilitate foster families and adoption processes. That there are numerous families that I know that would love to foster and adopt, but because the process has gotten so complicated and dilute, it just completely distorted, that it's hard to understand a process that's really broken. So trying to review what is broken and fix it, those two things, I think, domestically, along with understanding the prostitution industry and understanding how we can better assess that issue as well.
Jeremiah has his hand up.
I think Cliff has his hand up too. I don't think he knows how to put his hand up.
Jeremy is on his thing. It says Jeremiah Bullfrog. Jeremy, your hand is up. I saw your hand go up. I know Cliff's hand is up too. Okay, Cliff, go for it. Cliff, do you have something to say? You can go ahead and speak.
There we go. Yeah. Hey, Kevin, thank you for your comment on technology. It made me think, like, if I was a trafficker and my main source of funneling traffic victims into the US was across the border, and I wanted to act fast before I could dig a tunnel to get people under the border, I might want to send cartel members in on visas to set up so-called whatever business or whatever relationship they could have here that sort of looks legitimate, to optimize the return on my investment in the traffic because they consider them like traffic property, that I would want to manage them more carefully to optimize my profits. Do you think that's an over anticipated potential thing they might do? Or what other thinker who sat down and think collectively about anticipating how these evil people would perpetrate the next evil? What is the next thing? Since they're very, very skilled and very adaptive to do these sort of things, you sort of put a pretend, I have to wear a lot. People talk about wearing a lot of hats. Well, in my business, we wear a lot of different hard hats. If I imagine I was a trafficker, what sort of hat would I put on, and what would I start thinking, anticipating how they think? And Jared, you and Allie both have tremendous intelligence on this. Have you thought about that?
Well, the executive order that President Trump put into place with declaring the cartels and gangs as terrorist organizations, that was massive. That put a major dent into cartel operations. They were not happy with that, because not only does that allow for further funding to be directed towards those operations, but it also allowed for the seizing of their assets. And when you seize that organization's assets, that doesn't just include financial assets, that doesn't just include houses and cars, that also includes technology. And so when you seize and you make these cartels aware that you have the potential to seize their computers, their laptops, any data that's found within, that is what terrifies them as well. So not only are you hitting their ability to make money, you are actually hitting and potentially gaining information and access to technology that they have been using to operate, not just nationally, but internationally.
Thank you.
Jeremy still has his hand up. I don't want to leave him out if he has something to say.
Yes, I apologize. I'm operating on my phone and I don't really know how the functions Works here still.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. So first, I want to say thanks to Ali and Jared for all their great work, and you guys as well for hosting this, because I think it's a very important topic. And as Brandy and Ali were speaking on earlier, with the domestic side of this, we operate Project Milk Carton. We put out the missing kids that would typically sit on, NITMIC's websites, trying to bring awareness to them. And we started this as a couple of researchers, Andy and myself, looking into the NGOs at the border and the border issue and so on back in 2022. And that led us to find out, that this border issue has flooded and overwhelmed our domestic system set up to protect our domestic children. And within that, it's leading to our foster care kids without the resources that they need, and the system itself set up to defend and protect them has left them vulnerable, because now they're focusing on the migrant kids. For instance, and I'm going to use this case because I'm looking into it currently, or have been for the last 2 weeks. But out of Arizona, there's this child. Her name is Emily Pike, who went missing from a foster care system, and because she was deemed a consistent runaway, she wasn't reported for a week. And they later found her body just disassembled and in trash bags, which is absolutely horrible. With looking into that, Katie Hobbs is caught up in a pay-to-play situation with the Sunshine residential homes in that area. And I say that to say this: our kids have become a money-making and political-driven. Sorry, I'm trying to tone down the rhetoric because I get very worked up on the situation, but um, there's a framework that's put in place. A lot of people, I don't think, really understand that they circumvent CPS. When CPS goes into homes to investigate kids and they find no wrongdoing, states can pick it up and circumvent the parents' rights under the 14th Amendment using civil courts. And you can bet that with the flood of immigrants into our system, it's leaving our domestic children at risk. And my biggest thing that I see is people aren't aware of this issue or this topic. So, and that's what with Project Milk Carton, we're, taking that direction to try to educate and provide tools and assistance to allow parents to be aware of what is taking place. My question would be, and I know Ali knows what we do and she knows a lot of this. My question would be to Ali, Jared, and anyone else: are you seeing or hearing anybody else talking about this topic, or the issue that it's causing on our domestic kids as well? Because it's I think is one of the biggest topics that should be talked about with our domestic kids.
Yeah, I think that it is being discussed. I think that because this new administration came in and they've been working very hard in the short amount of time that they had, that there are people in place now that can start to review those things. So with the director of Homeland Security and those efforts, they're able to look more at the border issues. And with the director of Health and Human Services, that would fall under Health and Human Services. And so now that that director has been selected, and now that certain positions are being put in place, along with a Department of Government Efficiency to review certain aspects of government operations to make sure that they're operating efficiently. I think that those are some of the programs that will start to be reviewed and make sure that
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, was that her that froze?
I believe so.
Hopefully she comes back. If not, we'll see her again in 2 weeks. Yep, I bet you, I wonder if it's her.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Okay, but I just also want to add on to that. So one of the things that we're picking up, Jeremy, so we do a lot of interviews with convicted traffickers that we've been able to gain a rapport and trust with. And from years of fact checking them, there's certain ones that we really take to heart what they say. And one of them is a former Sinaloa cartel member, Mexican mafia member prior to his incarceration in California for murder. And he's now since deported. But we speak to him on a weekly basis, and he explained that one pattern that they're seeing in terms of the Mexican mafia and the cartels on the border is that children, and I was told of a specific case in Texas that were actually taken from Texas back into Mexico for the purpose of trafficking. So that's something that we haven't seen any reporting on, but it is something that there's actually another case that we're aware of that occurred. Kids were taken into Mexico and then sent actually over to Europe in that specific case and were rescued. So, as far as the domestic trafficking, it's, I think a lot more attention is going to be gained now that the border is never fully secure, but now that the traffic is slowed, we're, in addition to trying to figure out where the 500,000 kids are that came from the border unaccompanied, we're also looking at, at the domestic trafficking issue. And to your point about the adoptions, it's a mess. It's one of our, we provided some policy recommendations to the Secretary of Homeland Security recently and Tom Homan about what to do whenever these children are found, because we don't want them to go directly to a foster care system that's already broken.
Mhm. And Trish, you have you, oh, excuse me, can't talk. You have had your hand up for a while. And then Brandy has her hand up too. And then we're gonna have to, like I said, this could go on forever and ever and ever. I'm gonna have to cut it off, but I hope everybody comes back again in 2 weeks and we can have another conversation. So Trish, I'll let you go ahead and have your question or your comment, and then Brandy, and then we'll have to close her down for the day.
Okay, well, mine will be quick. Just wanted to bring up that I think all of this is great, and it's all about awareness and funding. So I know Greg Smith, we're both with Raymond James. We're going to be sponsoring an event, hopefully in the next couple months, to help raise awareness and funding for all of the initiatives that Allie and Dr. do. But I also wanted to invite, so please let us know when any of you have an event that we can bring awareness. And we actually have one coming up that I wanted to invite both of you to attend virtually if you could, even if it's just for 15 minutes. We're doing an event as a guest for an Elder Options, which is a state agency, on March 26th at 5 o'clock. And we have 50 caseworkers, not just caseworkers for the elderly, but caseworkers for the hospitals. And that would be perfect if we could get you to just talk a few minutes to them, at least to let them know what to do and a few steps. So you're invited to do that if you can, and we'll keep you informed of any other events.
Thank you.
So thank you
so much. I mean, collaboration, that's what's it's gonna take, right? Everybody coming
That's it.
together. Brandy, go ahead. You're up.
All right. Well, you just touched on something as well that I want to say real quick, comment back to what you just said. That is huge. And yes, major awareness needs to go to the nurses, to the doctors, to the hospitals. We have had an influx of nurses and doctors reaching out to us, letting us know what they see that's coming in. And when you get 11-year-olds 9 months pregnant, or repetitively coming in with those STDs, that's very huge. So again, thank you for allowing her to hold this today and talk to y'all. Unfortunately, I'm sorry I cannot turn on my phone, my camera, because of security for our team, because of what we do. We assist all levels of law enforcement in those sex trafficking cases. And so what I wanted to share real quick too is what's also important to make sure, like Jared said, it's important to have somewhere for these minors to go when they get pulled out of the situation. It's also important that we make sure that those that are pulled out, who are victims and or recruiters sometimes, depending on the case you're looking at, also are not shipped back to their country to be put right back into the work or brutally attacked or killed, and their family threatened because they go back to that country they came from as well, if they're like I said, victim slash recruiter, because most of the recruiters we see in Texas are also female. So there is a lot to learn here, from the university and the community. And again, just thank you for allowing all of us to come in as Allie invited us, and share information and let her and Jared do what they do, because when they are able to go to prisons and speak with traffickers, that's huge. When they're able to go to Congress and speak like she has, that's huge. Not all of us can do that. We all have our own niche. And it's huge for them to have a platform to speak to and share this information, which is our responsibility once we know it, right? So just wanted to share that. Thank you so very much. And we look forward to 2 weeks out watching what is shared next week.
Yes, thank you so much. And it's such a it's difficult to hear. And I wonder, a final say is I wonder if, and you don't need to answer this, Allie, because I know we're hitting time here, but I wonder if awareness is so important, obviously, around this topic, but I wonder if people avoid even hearing it because it's such a difficult topic, and then awareness doesn't get out there. I'm talking about my neighbors who never think about human trafficking, the farmers from North Dakota who that's not something that's in their wheelhouse or that they even consider. But I know for a fact that I bet we have trafficked human beings in North Dakota, whether it's labor or sex or whatever, they're there. And so it's something that everywhere in every single state needs to happen, and we need to be aware, and we need to be talking about it in all
Well,
areas and collaborating even
yeah.
with the lay people of the world, not just the professionals who are interested in this topic.
Well, you bring up a valid point, and I really appreciate, and I want, in my final comments, I want to just show my appreciation for Aspen University for putting on these educational calls, because honestly, it's very important to get the word out there. And as a university, I haven't seen many universities take this conversation and try to educate the masses on it. It's really important. So I really want to thank you guys for doing that. But as far as being able to digest the difficulty of the conversation, I would like to just refer back or think back to World War II when the Holocaust was going on. We reflect back on that situation a lot, and we often wonder, why didn't people say anything? Why didn't people do anything? What was going on at that time was very horrific, and they didn't have the mechanisms that we have in place now to be able to easily communicate what's going on. We're aware through videos, social media, that this is going on, and we have the ability to further communicate. But we look back on those moments, those horrific times in history, and we say, why didn't they do something? And then we look back, or we look at where we are now, and if it's something that's too horrific for someone to understand, if they don't start combating it, then we can't judge those from the past for not doing what they needed to do to stop those horrific travesties from occurring, because we're not doing it when it's happening right in front of our eyes, right here, right now, today.
Yeah.
And so this is why I try and encourage and empower individuals that yes, it's tough, but putting your head in the sand is not going to make the crime go away. There is more slavery going on today than at any point in history prior. And if that doesn't shock individuals that want to combat and that are ashamed of slavery in not only America's history, but in the world's history, it's going on today. And so we are compelled to learn more about it. We are compelled, or should be, to do whatever we can to fight back on it. So it's not a nonpartisan, or it is a nonpartisan issue that should have bipartisan support. It is not a political issue. It's a humanitarian issue, and it's a crisis. And so I mean, you take what you can handle, you learn what you can handle. It's bite-sized chunks. It's not, you don't want to be drinking out of a fire hose, but everyone does have a responsibility to start to understand, because ignoring the problem is not going to make it go away. And if we are ashamed by the slavery that occurred in the past, but we do nothing when it's occurring in the present, then what are we doing?
Right, exactly. And that is a great way to end today's session. That was wonderful, wonderfully said, as you always are. And we are blessed and have so much gratitude for you to be here for the next 4 times. I'm so excited to hear the next time on March 25th, same time, talking about sextortion against kids and everything that's going to bring up. And then, on April 8th, you come back. On April 22nd, you come back. And I hope you come back again next year, because I don't think this is a one and done. I think this is we have to get this message out repeatedly over and over. So thank you so much for being here, and everybody else here. Dr. Sadolski, thank you for all of your input and all of the questions and comments. Thank you. And I hope to see you guys in 2 weeks again to have another great conversation around this topic.
Thank you so much for having us.
Everyone have
Thank
a
you.
great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.